Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're going to go ahead and give everybody about 2 or 3 more minutes to get started here, and then we'll get on our way. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're going to go ahead and get started here. I think I figured out how to make this go to Facebook Live. It says 12 people are watching right now. So that is the first success of the evening. This is a new platform for us, the Zoom webinar. So I apologize in advance if there are any technical difficulties. I'd like to start out really quickly by recognizing the panelists we have on the phone call here tonight with us. We have Dr. Melissa Miller-May, the Vice Chair of Safe Sport and Operational Risk on the Michigan Swimming Board of Directors. We have Randy Julian from USA Swimming, the Manager of Program Development for the Central Zone. And also from USA Swimming, we have Mark Hesse, Manager of Performance Development in the Team Services Department at USA Swimming. It is possible that later this evening, we will have Joel Schienefield, the Managing Director of Sport Development, join us. And then we also have Dawn Gurley, the Director of LSC Operations for Michigan Swimming, on the line here. So without further ado, this is our town hall on COVID-19 and Michigan Swimming's response. And Facebook Live just stopped. That's comforting. Give me 1 second while I start that again. I think I clicked a button I wasn't supposed to click. Okay, there we go. Couple pieces of technology related things before we get going. We're using our Zoom webinar, obviously tonight. So those of you who are on the Zoom and are attendees, you have 3 functions available to you down in the toolbar at the bottom. These are the chat box, which will allow you to send messages to the panelists and or myself. You'll have your raise hand button, which allows you to indicate to me that you would like to be recognized to speak. I'm going to ask that you hold off on the raise hand until we get to the Q&A, although I see Pat is trying it, so I'm going to try this. Pat, go ahead. I think you have to click a button. Well, maybe not. All right. Well, if you would like to speak, you can just raise your hand. It'll notify me, and it will give you the opportunity to unmute yourself. You'll need to click that unmute myself button, and then you should be able to speak. When you're done talking, please make sure you lower your hand using that same button in the toolbar. Instead of raise hand, it'll say lower hand. And the final thing is the Q&A. So on the side, you will see that there's a Q&A button on the very right-hand side of the toolbar. You can use that to drop questions anytime in the Q&A box. We'll be looking at those consistently throughout the evening. Those will be partly answered during the presentation and also partly during the Q&A at the end. And then also for the Q&A at the end, obviously, you're free to use the raise hand to speak feature. We also have a poll here, poll function. We have 3 planned throughout the evening. We're going to do our first one now for those of you that are on the Zoom. And the first question, these are all set up to be anonymous, so I won't see what you answer. You will only just count as a number. The first question we have is, how satisfied are you with Michigan Swimming's handling of COVID-19 to date? So if you would like to vote in that poll, feel free. You are more than welcome to do so. You don't have to. If you don't want to, you can simply exit out of it. So tonight, it is my intention to do 3 things with this webinar. We're going to start off by debriefing the current state. So we're going to understand kind of where we started back in the beginning of April when things started to unfold really, really quickly. Number 2, we're going to talk about the plan for the future, how this is going to shape youth sports in general. I'll provide a couple of key insights we obtained from the club situation assessment, and also provide some more information about planning resources available to you as clubs. And then obviously I would like to take questions. You're free to ask questions of any of our panelists here tonight, myself included. You have USA Swimming on the line here, and I'm sure they're happy to take questions as well. So that's going to be our agenda for this evening. I want to start out by pointing out here why this is so important. I think all of us realize that COVID-19 has turned into a huge part of our lives much quicker than any of us really thought it was going to. Michigan is one of the hardest hit states by COVID-19 right now. When I checked yesterday evening and pulled these statistics, we were number 5 in the country. Our first case was reported March 10th. We now have more cases and deaths than both Washington and California, which were states that had COVID-19 first reported almost now 60 days ago. So it is really important here in Michigan that we adhere to the social distancing guidelines diligently, and that has seriously affected our ability to conduct sport. I want to reassure everybody, though, that this is absolutely the right thing to be doing, and Michigan Swimming 110% supports the guidance of state, federal, and local health authorities in social distancing. So while this does impact our programs, while this is obviously not an ideal situation, this is why it's so important that we take the time now to really spend time on social distancing, so that way we can slow the spread in our state. I mean, you can see how quickly in densely populated areas and other places that it doesn't, there are serious cases in New York, New Jersey, and we certainly don't want Michigan to end up looking like that. So obviously this has presented a crisis for Michigan Swimming here. Oops, I lost my presentation, there it is. There's a Michigan Swimming, our crisis plan pretty much centers around three key things: be, know, and do. And this is something that they teach here in the University of Michigan's Business School all the time. The first part of our crisis management plan centers around things that we as leaders need to exhibit trait-wise during a crisis. So being present, responsive, compassionate, flexible, and solution-oriented for you. While we're doing those things, it's important that we keep certain things in mind to help guide our decisions. Most importantly, Michigan Swimming will, has core values: integrity, inclusion, education, excellence. And we have to keep those in mind as we make decisions going through a crisis. And also remember that member health and safety is going to be our #1 priority, always. That is the most important thing that we need to put at the forefront of our minds while we're talking about these things. And then finally, do. These are the actions that Michigan Swimming will take as we proceed in managing a crisis, right? So we will act in a timely fashion. We will give due consideration to member interests, recognizing that sometimes there are tensions between what some groups would like and others would like, and between what we would like in this organization and what external forces are saying. It is our goal to ensure the financial stability of our organization and ultimately aid our members in any way that we possibly can while trying to get through a crisis like this. This is a highly simplified version of crisis management, but it is one that I think we all kind of can resonate with and understand the importance of what's going on here. So I want to point out that once we, recognized that there was kind of a crisis in Michigan, and once we started to see that there were going to be some significant ramifications from COVID-19, that Michigan Swimming acted quickly. Like I said, our first case in Michigan was reported on March 10th. On Wednesday, March 11th, Michigan Swimming received notification from Eastern Michigan University that it was going to be shutting down its facilities for, at the time, what it indicated to be through the end of March, effectively canceling our short course 13 and over state championship. Michigan Swimming decided to cancel the 13 and over state championship without intent to reschedule for the near future, because we realized that this was serious, right? We were only getting worse. We were only going up the peak, and it was important to keep individuals, their families, and our broader community safe. So it was our decision to not have large group gatherings. And that was further emphasized on Thursday, March 12th, when Michigan Swimming canceled all of its competitions through April 11th in the morning, and USA Swimming provided guidance to LSCs in the afternoon, strongly encouraging us to suspend competition for 30 days. As the situation progressed, that next week on Tuesday, March 17th, USA Swimming officially extended its moratorium on competition through at least April 30th. Again, recognizing that this was going to be a growing problem across the country and that we needed to slow the spread, we now stand in a state where competition is suspended through April 30th. And then finally, on Friday, March 27th, USA Swimming shared a modification to its liability insurance policy that permits teams to engage in virtual dryland training, provided they comply with certain requirements. So that is something that I know teams had been asking about for the week before, and we applaud USA Swimming for stepping up, recognizing that there was a need, and providing a supplemental insurance policy to help us cover that. We've also had some additional information communicated from USA Swimming in the Central Zone through these weekly conference calls that we've had. The sanction moratorium is going to remain in effect until at least April 30th. We've been assured that the USA Swimming Board of Directors will continue to review its necessity based on the situation at the time. They are paying active attention to it and will make modifications, as they see best in the best interest of members, public safety, et cetera, et cetera. The next update that you may have received and has been posted on the Michigan Swimming website now is the Central Zone Diversity and Inclusion Camp has unfortunately been canceled this year with USA Swimming's restriction or recommendation and plan to cancel all things that require travel. Obviously, traveling to a swim camp, gathering in large numbers was not ideal. USA Swimming and the Central Zone are notifying those participants, and hopefully we will see some way to, engage with them in the future once it's safe to do so. The Zone Open Water Championship has been canceled. I believe it was scheduled to be in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin. Again, it's gathering in large groups is at this time not ideal, and it's critical that we avoid that as much as possible to slow the spread. And then we've heard from USA Swimming earlier this week, and I heard today from Joel Schoenefeld on a separate webinar that USA Swimming is really working on 30-day decision horizons, but recognizing that even over those 30 days, things are going to consistently change. We don't know what tomorrow holds. USA Swimming doesn't know what tomorrow holds. The states don't know what tomorrow holds. Health departments don't know what tomorrow holds. So we have to be flexible, and we have to recognize that while we are looking at these short-term decision horizons, that even if something that says we're going to go out until April 30th, that could change overnight when new information comes to light. As we are made aware of that kind of information, though, at Michigan Swimming, we will pledge to share that with you as promptly as we possibly can, because we recognize that that impacts your operations as clubs. So that's kind of the brief overview of where we are as an organization and where we've been. And now I want to move into the second part of my presentation here before we get to the questions and answers, talking about what this looks like for teams now, what this looks like for sport in general. I think we've recognized again that COVID-19 is a serious public safety threat, and there are going to be lasting implications for small businesses all over and sports associations. So I was privileged to be able to attend a webinar this week from the Aspen Institute from the Aspen Institute Sports and Society program. And they highlighted for us 3 what they call anticipated outcomes for youth sports in general. Outcome number 1 was, I think, the one that most of us are recognizing very quickly. Organized youth and school sports are likely won't return until May at the very earliest, likely sometime this summer and quite possibly the fall. And so I'm going to open up here another poll for you all to respond to here, asking when realistically do you think your teams, your programs will be back in the water? I know there's a lot of uncertainty right now, but trying to gauge a sense here from our teams what we're feeling. Outcome number 2 is that once we see virus restrictions lift, we'll notice greater demand for organized sports. But unfortunately, as some of these businesses and sports leagues have to weather the storm, it's possible that some won't be around, and we will see less supply and potentially less participation. One thing that the Aspen Institute highlighted for us was parents are going to be potentially very nervous to send kids back into group gathering environments. And we are going to have to work as teams, as clubs, as sports organizations to implement measures that really make sure that even when we're allowed to return, that we're still maintaining proper hygiene, proper social distancing, avoiding spread. Because as we've heard from health authorities, there is a fear that there could potentially be a second peak if we all go back to everyday life as we were doing it 3 or 4 months ago without taking additional precautions. So even if we have high demand, it might be hesitant for participation. And part of our job will be convincing people that it is safe to go back to some of these activities, which will drag out the kind of recovery period a little bit longer. And then number 3 is very interesting to think about, and I'll leave this for your teams to mull over the next couple weeks and such, is as we have a misalignment between demand and supply of quality, affordable sport activity, it's possible that we'll see new business models, new sport models develop to meet the needs of children and families. And there was some very interesting discussion on the webinar about what that could potentially look like. And I would challenge your teams to think about what that means for you come the fall or middle of the summer when you are likely to be able to reopen. So there are a couple key questions for clubs that kind of we get a takeaway here on this. Number 1, given that outcome number 1 says it's going to be a little bit longer than we anticipated before we're back in the water, and actually I'll share these poll results with you all right now. Most teams are anticipating being back sometime in June, but we're also recognizing that it's entirely possible that a lot of us won't be back until July, August, or September. So what resources are available to your clubs right now, financial or otherwise, to handle this kind of period of extended shutdown? One that we didn't necessarily plan for. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a couple slides. Number two is discussing steps that clubs need to start taking now to prepare for the extended out of water period, right? What does that look like in terms of engagement with your athletes? What does that look like with your financial stability, et cetera, et cetera? I know from the club situation assessment, many teams have already started thinking about these questions, which is great, but that's something we need to be considering. And then number three, finally, once we talked about that future demand, once we're back in the water, what can we do? What can my club do to innovate and address that future increased demand for competitive swimming? Even though the Olympics are postponed for the summer and we won't see the Olympic bump this year, we need to be thinking about how to serve people who are itching to get back into athletic activity or who want to engage in athletic activity in a new fashion. So that's something I think clubs should be thinking about. So with that in mind, the club situation assessment that we sent out provided some really good insight into specifically what we were looking at in the immediate and short term, and then in the long term, what member clubs need in order to be sustainable, in order to be successful. A couple things I wanted to point out here for some of you are that the last in-water training opportunity for many of us was early March, about 2 days after Michigan swimming, or 1 day after Michigan swimming canceled the state meet, and then the day that we extended our moratorium on competitive activity, March 12th. But really, most teams that have responded have said that they were either out of the water March 6th or maybe March 15th. That's still a solid 3 weeks of not training. So we've got athletes that are, and coaches and officials that are missing their swimming community right now. So that's one of the things that we are working on at Michigan Swimming, and we'll get to here in a second on the other half of the slide, is engaging and still reminding people that even though we haven't seen each other physically in the last 3 weeks and likely won't be able to see each other in a pool setting for a substantial while longer, we are still a community. And overwhelmingly, a lot of our aquatic facilities used by clubs are public K through 12 institutions. And as many of you saw, Governor Whitmer signed her executive order earlier this week with respect to education systems and school districts and school closings and et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a lot of uncertainty right now for what that means for school facilities being available to teams for training. While schools are not in session, if they will be allowed to reopen, and if some will choose to reopen. So that's something we are certainly cognizant of here at Michigan Swimming, is that we are dealing with a large number of teams that rely on these school systems that were just affected by Governor Whitmer's executive order. So from the club situation assessment, we really identified 3 key short-term needs that spanned along most clubs. Number one is continued peer engagement, whether that be for athletes, coaches, parents, in their communities. And so teams are looking for ways to do that amongst themselves and have asked that Michigan Swimming step up and remind everybody that we are also part of the same LSC and same organization. The second thing was planning resources, whether that be financial planning or working with our age group and senior development department chairs to think about training planning as we have to cope with a very strange, potentially very short long course season or an altered short course season next fall with training kids that have been out of the water for a substantial amount of time. And then consistent communication from the LSE and about what's going on with respect to COVID-19. And then for the long term, we've identified some needs as well. Long-term member retention and program strategies. As we talked about in the last slide, programs are going to have to change as a result of COVID-19. And teams are looking for some idea of what that might be and how to retain members, as once we are able to return, it's possible that we will have a lot of families that are placed in a difficult financial position and won't be able to return right away. And how do we continue to support them and retain members given that? And long-term, obviously, financial support and planning resources. So Michigan Swimming is going to immediately increase its efforts in the areas for the short-term needs identification. And on the next couple slides, we're going to talk about some financial support and planning resources under the CARES Act that I'm sure you guys have all heard of by now, but we want to kind of summarize that for you briefly in the event that that's something your team would like to or needs to take advantage of. Disclaimer from the legal department of my brain. We at Michigan Swimming is not providing financial or legal advice. We're not licensed to do so. We're providing everything here for reference. If you need to seek financial advice, you should talk to a licensed financial advisor or your legal counsel making your business decisions that affect you, your club, or anybody else. So the next couple slides here are information that was current as of today, likely oversimplified, but still meant to be useful and as a reference and as a place to start. As many people are aware, Congress just over a week ago and the president just over a week ago signed the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid Relief something Act. I forgot what the title was. I wrote it in my email and then it went out this other side of my brain. It has two key components. Number one is an expansion of the economic disaster injury loans, or EIDL loans, typically available from the Small Business Administration. These loans are available today with a very quick turnaround time. There's a maximum amount of $10,000. And like we said, if you're approved, that money is available to be in your bank account in the next 3 days. If you choose to take advantage of an EIDL loan program, you maintain your eligibility for the Paycheck Protection Program loans, which we'll talk about here in a second. And if you're looking for more information, it is available from the Small Business Administration website, and that is linked for you in the PDF version of the slides that I will send out after our town hall today. The second piece that was in the CARES Act is the Paycheck Protection Program loans. These are the loans that you've likely heard about that have a forgivable portion of the loan. These loans are now available today. Banks began accepting applications yesterday. And from what we've heard, some banks are able to process them easier than others, or more flexible than others. So we encourage you to work with your current bank to see what's available to you and then evaluate if you need to go outside of that. These loans have a much more significant principal to them. The maximum amount is either $10 million or 2.5 times your monthly payroll. The lesser of the two, and there are specifics for how to calculate what monthly payroll is and your expenses that would qualify. That information is available from the two links that are below from the U.S. Treasury Department and the Small Business Administration website. This is the loan, like I mentioned, that has a forgivable component if after an 8-week period from loan origination. The key thing we want to point out here is that if you are in need of these financial support and you determine after talking with your boards, your financial advisors, et cetera, that this is what you think is appropriate for you, 501c3s with fewer than 500 employees are eligible. So that qualifies a lot of our teams, our clubs, to be able to take advantage of these programs. So this help is out there if you need it, and we encourage you to seek it out if it's advisable for you. The Paycheck Protection Program has that forgivable component. It's after an initial 8-week period from the loan origination, but for qualified expenses only. Some of those expenses that will be able to be forgiven are payroll costs, interest on the mortgage obligations, rent, payments for utilities, and if you have tipped employees, the additional wages paid to those employees. The important thing to note here is that the forgivable amount can be reduced if you either in several instances, some of them including but not limited to, if you decrease your payroll during a specific period of time, and if you take out an economic disaster injury loan, an EIDL loan, it is possible that your forgivable amount will be reduced by the amount of your EIDL loan. Again, we encourage you to check with financial advisors in your banks to understand the exact specifics of that. But this is a unique component to the Paycheck Protection Program loans, that there is a forgivable element. It's important to note that the government has advised that there is going to be high participation in this program. So only up to 25% of the loan amount that is forgiven can be for non-payroll costs. So again, make sure that you take that up and discuss that with your financial advisors. If you are interested in taking out a Paycheck Protection Program loan, it will be administered by local banks, not necessarily the Small Business Administration. and it does have some specific documentation requirements. I'm not going to go through everything that's here on the slide. I know all of you are very much able to read, and again, this will be included in the PDF version of the slides I send out after, but just be aware that if you're interested in participating, you should start gathering these documents now and tracking them down if you need to, working with your secretaries, treasurers, accountants, bookkeepers, et cetera, because you will need some of these documents to apply. So kind of going forward, what does Michigan Swimming, what does this look like for us in terms of an LSC? What can we be doing? The intent on this slide here is to highlight that Michigan Swimming, even though we're not public facing doing 110 different things, we have lots of things going on in the background. This is just some of them. I'm actually excited to announce that today I sent a proclamation to the board seating the COVID-19 Select Committee for Michigan Swimming that has been informally meeting for the last couple of weeks, but has been formalized now with the authority to go ahead and start making some immediate decisions and take some immediate actions if needed in order to comply with, or in order to be as agile and flexible as possible during this COVID-19 situation. We are having weekly meetings with USA Swimming, our Mighty Mega LSC leadership conference calls. Those have been incredibly helpful in telling us what other LSCs are doing across the country, bouncing ideas off of each other, and really figuring out what the best possible way is that we can continue to support our members. We have board of directors meetings scheduled for April and May to talk about long-term LSC-wide strategy adaptations that we are going to have to make. We fully recognize that there will definitely be an alteration to a long course season if we are able to have one. And there will be alterations we will need to make in consideration of the fact that the Olympics have shifted a year, that people have been out of the water, a short course season might need to be modified, and that we will be dealing with an interesting set of circumstances where some teams will be able to be in the water and others might still be out for longer periods of time. So at those board meetings, we intend to discuss those types of things that we can be doing. I'm very grateful to our athletes committee. We have an amazing set of athletes committee members and athlete representatives that have really stepped up to try to figure out ways to continue to engage our athletes whether that be via social media. I know they're planning some webinars or some games or some trivia or something that sounds a whole lot more fun than the webinar that you are on right now. And you know, they have really stepped up and made sure that their peers are doing well throughout this whole thing. So I continue to applaud them for their efforts day in and day out. Our coaches committee is starting to plan webinars and coach socials and other events. So I encourage you to be on the lookout for those. I believe one was just sent out to all coaches last night about a coach social. And then I'm committed to providing you with bi-weekly updates to head coaches and club presidents just about the situation, developments we've gotten from USA Swimming, the governor's office, et cetera, et cetera. My philosophy with cadence of communication has been communicate with updates, not just to clutter your inbox. I know every company that you've possibly ever given your email address to is inundating you with telling you how they're handling COVID-19. And I don't want to continue to clutter your inbox more than I have to, but I do want to make sure that we are providing updates. Obviously, if there is something urgent, I will send out email blasts right away, but otherwise I will try to keep our LSC level updates on a bi-weekly basis with key points, key information, and with a reminder that my door is absolutely always open in the event that you need to reach out to me to discuss you know, anything that's going on with your team in the interim, or if you have questions. We are, as an LSC, in communication with MDHHS and the governor's office as things are coming out and as they affect us. We obviously don't have significant inside information per se or anything of the like, but we are making sure that we are monitoring the situation in that respect. So this will be a slide that's available in the PDF version of the slides that I send out after our meeting here tonight. But these are some resources that are available to you and that are a list of some previous communications. I know you've had a lot of things coming at you very quickly, and we want to make sure that you're able to continue to you know, reference the things that you need to. As always, we at Michigan Swimming are here for you no matter what. So if you need to reach out to any of us, we are all a resource. I've included the contact information for myself, Mary Ann, Melissa, and Dawn on these slides. but anybody on the board is here to help and support you, and you're free to bring any concerns, questions, comments to them, and they will funnel it to the right place. Before I open this up for questions and answers, I just want to say that I genuinely appreciate that all of you are in an incredibly difficult situation, and your diligence in handling this with such grace, with such flexibility, understanding, and patience. This is not an easy time for any of us, I don't think. And I know it's really, really hard to be away from the sport that we all love. And it's going to get harder, unfortunately, from here on out for the next couple weeks. And I just want you to know that it is your dedication, your motivation, your drive, your resourcefulness, et cetera, that really make me driven to do the best possible job that I can do for you, and for us to do as a board that we can do for you. You are, as clubs, as coaches, as club presidents, our members, along with our athletes and everybody else, it is our job to serve you. So as I've said in all of my emails, you know, it's our job as an LSC to be here passively in the background when things are good. But when things are challenging, it's our job to step up to the plate and really be out and be an activist and be up and support you. So if there's anything that you need over the next couple weeks, couple months, we are here. Please reach out. That is our job. So I am now going to open it up for questions. You are able to either use the Q&A feature in Zoom, or you can raise your hand with the little button, and I can quote unquote allow you to talk. I received a couple questions, or the office received a couple questions that I am happy to address as well. But I'm going to see if anybody here has questions immediately. So I'll give folks a couple seconds here. And you're free to ask questions of any of us, any of the panelists here, myself, Mark, Randy, Melissa, Dawn, anybody that you might have questions for. And I apologize, it does look like the Facebook live stream stopped, but I will post a link to the webinar for anybody else who's interested to watch. I believe it's being recorded, I hope. Okay, so I'll address a couple questions that we received via email then. Please, again, if you have questions right now that you would like me to answer, use the raise hand button or type them in the Q&A. They come up on my screen right next to me. Some of the questions we've answered or have been asked center around if Michigan Swimming is going to be able to lower dues next in the fall, or return a portion of the dues, or other things to help alleviate the financial burden on teams and help return money to teams that will need it. The answer to that question is right now, unfortunately, that is something that we haven't made a decision on. That's something that will be discussed, I'm sure, at length with the board of directors probably on Tuesday. We are looking at the best possible way to make the impact where teams need it, with the teams that need it. So I don't have a definitive answer for you on those types of financial questions, but they are on our radar. We are looking at ways. It's just important to us that we make sure that we are providing financial impact and benefit where it's going to be most useful and help teams really make a difference. I've gotten several questions here on the Q&A, so let's see. Okay. One question has been, it has been helpful and less stressful on families to know the Olympics has been moved and that schools have a plan, so that so why not just cancel the remainder of our long course season so our kids won't be stressed out about being left behind? I can answer part of this, and then Mark, I was on Wisconsin's town hall the other night, and I think you had a good answer for us about USA Swimming's kind of philosophy on how we're going to make sure people aren't left behind. Mary, it is that has not been something that the board has yet to discuss. I think it's been on all of our radars. I think it's an unfortunate reality that we are staring down the barrel of the fact that it will be challenging to have a long course season. I think we're all would like to be optimistic and say that we will definitely have a long course season, but you know, we realize that that might not be possible. It's at this point, it seems a little bit premature to cancel the long course season outright, but I think it is on our radar. And Mark has some pretty good information for us about USA Swimming's philosophy on making sure that teams aren't left behind based on where kids are able to get in. So I'll turn it over to Mark here for an answer there.
All right, thanks, Joe. I think the main thing to look at is, you know, if teams can get back in the water in June or early July, you may want to, you know, be able to host some meets during that time period, either at the end of July or the beginning of August. Part of the reality is we don't know what will be allowed and not be allowed in terms of continued social distancing restrictions. Are meets of a large size even going to be something, you know, that is a reality in our near future? So I think just out and out canceling everything right now is, again, as Joe said, is probably pretty a little bit premature. As far as when meets will start to be held, our position at USA Swimming is that we will not begin allowing meets to be sanctioned until every LSC has the opportunity for their athletes to be in the water and practicing. Again, this is to allow a very level playing field, to not create a sense of urgency in a part of the country that maybe the virus hits at a later date. We don't want, you know, any overzealous coaches or parents to be thinking, oh, I need to move we need to move to Arizona temporarily because they're having meets, and Sally's 12 this summer and it's her big chance to, you know, create some top 10 times or break records or whatever. So the return to competition will be something that will happen consistently across the country. As far as I see a lot of questions on here about access to practice and when that will happen. And I think those decisions will be something that's going to be governed primarily by local and state officials, unless, you know, we end up under a national stay-at-home order. It's going to be those local and state officials who will determine when, you know, facilities will reopen, what type of numbers restriction there'll be on group gatherings, and that will inform, you know, what those practices will look like. And then obviously there will be the issue of any health department regulations or facility regulations, which may differ from facility to facility, even in the same community. So all of those things are issues that we don't really have an answer to. We're anticipating, you know, the different scenarios, and we'll be kind of, I guess, game playing or war game playing those scenarios out, and have some recommendations on how social distancing can be accomplished if we're allowed, you know, 10 people at a time, 25 people at a time, 50 people at a time, what that looks like in terms of how many kids per lane. Do they need to start from opposite ends? I mean, do we need to have less rest in between sets so they're not hanging on the wall together and it's more of a almost continuous swim situation going on? I think all of those things are in play, and you know, over the next few weeks, I would encourage each team and the coaching staffs to get together and start to think about what those scenarios may look like. And I would strongly encourage that you all remain in close contact with the operators of the facilities that you use, so you know what their plans are, what they're anticipating as to when you may have access to their facilities, and if they're putting in any different rules. And I think having a great relationship with those facilities and with local officials in your community, whether it's school board, whether it's your city mayor, town mayor, your board of aldermen, however your city's governed, your parks and rec department, having good contact with them and letting them know what you're doing to continue to serve the community and how important recreational activities and sport activities are. Doing all of those things are going to help make this transition when we get back to swimming a lot easier for everyone. And that was one of the key points, I think, that came out at the end of the Aspen Institute webinar. And I put the link to that in the chat feature. And I recommend you spend an hour and watch it. There was a lot of good information there. But keeping that contact with your facilities so that you have, you're able to plan for what that return to swimming looks like. I'm guessing it's not going to be a flip the switch and everybody's back to normal, right? It's going to be a process, and right now none of us really understands what that process might be. But I think it will become clearer as we get closer to the end of the complete stay at home and the complete social distancing regulations. USA Swimming is not planning on putting any type of prohibition on practice as a nationwide thing. So I think that again will be something that's governed much more locally than anywhere else. But the competition, return to full-scale competition or somewhat normal competition, that will be something that we're going to monitor and have a pretty tight control over. Great,
thank you, Mark. So to answer one of the questions here, Mark touched on at the end there, if permitted by the governor and if there are adequate social distancing or protocols in place to comply with the regulations set forth by local, state, federal health agencies, right? I don't see a reason why teams would not be permitted to practice if they're able to and if their facility is open, even if schools aren't. But like what Mark said, it is competition will be governed largely by when we're able to have almost everybody back in the water. So take the next question here. Clarify a question that we answered a little bit earlier for Mary. Leaning more towards championship meets, futures, nationals. If we can't be in the pool until May or June, how can a swimmer really plan on those? I think the reality, while I'm absolutely not committing to or saying anything about it here for Michigan Swimming, I can't answer for USA Swimming, but it is entirely possible that our championship season will be seriously altered. I think it would be potentially, given what the state looks like, unless we have a significant turnaround rapidly, it would even still be irresponsible for us to gather in such large numbers at a state championship meet or something of the like. So while I'm not announcing or saying the board has even considered a decision with anything with respect to championship meets, that is certainly a consideration that personally I think we have to give. Just to be very clear, that is not a decision saying that we are or not having championship meets for the state. That is just something that I think will be evaluated over the next couple of weeks or probably even the next week. And you can probably expect a little bit more clarity into that in the next 10 to 14 days officially would be my guess. Mark, Mark or Randy, do you have any insight into national level meets and what USA Swimming is thinking about those?
Yes, I do. I would say the chances of any type of nationals or juniors happening this summer, the meet that was scheduled for Indy obviously is totally impractical with the cancellation of trials. Just numbers wise, it wouldn't work. So any type of division of that meet into nationals or juniors, I can't announce officially that it's been canceled, but the likelihood of that happening is in the 1 percentile range. The scenario we had kind of been operating on for the last couple of weeks was to create a group of 15 to 20 regional type competitions that would encompass both zone and future kind of formatting and the facilities that we would use there, and have those scheduled for sometime in early to mid-August, obviously depending on the LSCs involved and what the school schedule looks like for them. But I'm not sure that even that is going to be possible. Again, it a lot depends on how it drags out. But I think any type of USA Swimming sponsored competition is probably going to be the highest thing that we would look at is a sectional regional type arrangement where travel would be obviously less of an issue to everyone, and we might be able to better control the size of the meets and not get up into the upper hundreds or more of athletes and coaches and spectators involved. So that's what we're operating on at the moment, but it literally changes weekly. Obviously, we've seen a huge shift in the federal response and federal guidelines, and even in individual state guidelines. So all of that's informing what we're doing. So I know our USC Swimming Board of Directors will be meeting next week in emergency session, and we'll be discussing some of those issues about what the championship meets will look like, if there are championship meets this summer, probably looking at the possibility of just all out and out canceling the long course season. But I don't know what that decision would look like, and I'm not predicting that any of that stuff will happen. But I can tell you that I'm 99% sure there will be no nationals or junior level competition this summer.
Great, thank you, Mark. Probably another question here to either Randy or Mark. If we have any specific information, either or specific to Michigan or the Central Zone, or just in general, on how teams are handling billing/club dues during the time when most of us are not able to hold practices, regular dues, modified dues, or no dues, or something in between.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Randy.
from our office, we don't have anything in a template form. But on the USA Swimming website, I was just looking up serving community coronavirus resources, and there's a link there for the swim coaches and swim team resources. And we are trying to take many different things that we're getting through different people in our division and posting those resources. So it's a huge page. And on that page are what some teams are doing in discounted forms, financial relief, different things like that. So it's resources for swimming coaches and swim teams.
I put the link in the in the chat.
It's a great location that's developing almost daily as things come in.
And the reality is, the answer to your question is teams are doing all of the things you mentioned there.
Everything.
Some are doing regular, some are doing modified, some are doing nothing, are not charging anything. Do you want me to answer Patrick's question about?
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, Patrick, I think that, again, I think that's probably, we're waiting for the board of directors to act on that. That is the staff recommendation that's going to be coming forward, but that's something that the board of directors has to vote on, whether or not any move to not allow sanctions has to be approved by the board of directors. So that may, again, that may be forthcoming next week, or you may just see a ban through May 30th. I don't know what way they're leaning. Obviously, there's a lot of, if we asked each of you what your best solution would be, we'd have a lot of different answers, and our board of directors and even our leadership team and staff at USA Swimming are not all in 100% agreement on any of these policies as we start to vet them and talk about them. We're obviously in agreement once the decision is made, but there's a lot of healthy discussion that occurs about the different strategies and different options that are being explored. So again, I think you might see that coming out next week in an official statement. And while it seems like unfair in one sense, that if an LSC was all clear by their health officials and government that they should be able to host meets, it does create that uneven playing field for athletes in the rest of the country. And that's something that philosophically our staff is dead set against that happening.
Great. Thank you, Mark. The next three questions we have here are somewhat related, so I'm going to take a stab at answering these. With respect to specific options being considered for an altered long course season, the short answer is yes. There is some level of ideas about how we could potentially alter the long course season. Obviously, nothing has been decided. It is premature to kind of discuss what those might be, given that we're not sure what the governor's executive orders are going to be over the next even week or two, if we're even going to be able to have a long course season. So yes, preemptively planning. I don't want to necessarily get into what a potential long course, modified long course season could be, because it could change tomorrow, depending on what our governor and what our health authorities here tell us we need to do. It's possible that we see, depending on who you talk to or who you listen to, it's possible we see a peak sooner or see a peak a lot later. And I think that's going to be guided. That's going to guide what we are able to do with our long course season. So general ideas, yes. Specific plans, no. It is being thought about. I hate to give you the non-answer answer because I know it's a totally terrible answer to receive, but I certainly don't want to create false hope or potentially have you make a decision for your long course season based on something that we might not do. I think we'll have a little bit more clarity over the next 2-3 weeks once we understand how our state is kind of going, and as we see if our governor is going to extend some of these orders a lot further. I know we've seen several governors in other states extend things now into June. If that's the case for us, obviously that would be a much different return to swimming even after, if we were done with a June order versus if we were done potentially on the 13th still. So not a great answer for you, I know, but that is the honest answer is yes, we're considering some options, but don't want to necessarily reveal or go into too much detail about what those might be right now without understanding further what the state, local, health authorities are going to be telling us. We will likely be focusing more of our effort on what this means for short course season than what it means for long course season. So I know, Steve, you asked here if we're planning for scenarios for both summer and winter. Yes, I think it's reasonable to expect that we're also planning for altered winter or short course season, whether that means if we're able to return in July, hypothetically, if that means we forego our typical August break and just start our short course season early or something like that, or if we alter where we need to put championship meets or something like that. I think that's certainly reasonable to expect that we are considering those types of things for winter as well. Pat has asked, and it's been upvoted a couple times, what should we do if we are opening entries for high level meet tomorrow and it takes place at the end of May? I'll give you a little bit of my answer there, Pat. My guidance as the general chair would be you should operate under the assumption, or you should operate under the current circumstances we have, right? So we haven't seen anything from the governor's office that's extended prohibitions into May. And we haven't seen anything from USA Swimming that has officially canceled anything through May. However, using the logical part of my brain that's watching what's going on around us in the state, it might behoove you to potentially wait a couple days or a week in opening your entries there, especially if that's going to be a meet that you anticipate being attended potentially by teams from other states. I mean, we don't know what's going to, what other states are going to be able to do if you're going to be allowed to travel for things like that or whatnot. So it might behoove you to wait to postpone entry opens for a week or so if you want. I'm sure Randy in our sanctioning office would be happy to approve that for you without a problem. But obviously, as soon as we get a little bit more guidance, I think that would be the more, you'd have a more complete answer. So if there is a modified long course season, as in the past few years, smaller teams have had issues getting into meets, would there be a guarantee that all teams are getting opportunities to attend meets? I think that's something that would be looked at by the board to see what we can do in that regard. I think it's going to be challenging depending on what teams are even able to host meets. That will be something we will have to evaluate down the road once we know when we're able to host meets. That's a very good question. It's one that I will flag here for the board to consider once we have some more clarity. I think it's important, but I think there's a lot of circumstances there that we're going to have to evaluate before we're able to effectively say how to best ensure that everybody gets opportunities to compete. Because I do know, like you've mentioned, it's difficult to get into long course meets and even meets just during the long course season here in our LSC just because of our challenge with facilities being available. So it's a really great question. It's something I've flagged here now for the board to consider once we have a little bit more information. We have a question here. If are we guided more by the state level or the federal level to determine when we can officially return to practicing? The answer from my perspective at the state level as Michigan Swimming is that right now the restrictions on our activities are imposed by our governor. So obviously we have a state executive order out that prohibits non-essential or activities not essential to sustaining life. So obviously that's going to trump anything that we have guidance wise from like the CDC. However, it's entirely possible that the CDC or the president or any of those other entities come out with stricter federal guidance that might last longer than state guidance. And if that's the case, I think we will be following the guidance that is most prudent, the guidance that, like I've mentioned, protects our member health and safety in the community at large above all else. So I'm not saying we'll be unreasonable by any stretch in blanketly accepting guidance, but it's going to be a balancing act based on who's telling us what's more responsible for protecting the public at large. Keeping in mind that, like Mark mentioned, this is not just flipping a switch, returning to competition and returning to practices, that there will be measures that we will have to take in order to continue to protect our athletes and our coaches and officials and everybody else that we're around and their families. People who might have contact with the at-risk population, just because it's difficult, or you might not be worried about your personal risk, or young people might not be worried about their personal risk. We have people in our families and our households that we come into contact with on a daily basis that could be at risk by us engaging in some of these activities like flipping a switch. So we will take the avenue that is most protective of public health, but keeping in mind that we will have to return to some level of normalcy at some point with these extra measures in place. So I beg your patience on a more definitive answer to that one, just because we don't know what the guidance will be over time. But I'll open it up if any of the other panelists have anything they want to weigh in on that topic. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I would just like to ask for everybody to have some patience. I mean, right now we're in the midst of doing exposure-based risk assessments to try and figure out all of the means of exposures in our populations. I mean, originally we all heard that as long as we washed our hands and as long as we maintained 6 feet of distance, we were safe. Well, now we're hearing, which is common with other pathogens, other virus, that spread can occur through aerosolization. And somebody could, essentially be exposed to pathogen when somebody is not even in a space. If they coughed in an area, if they sneezed in an area, if they exhaled and you walked through an aerosol sort of plume. So I guess I just ask that we all have a little bit of patience, allow ourselves a little bit of grace to figure out truly how best we're able to protect our swimmers and our families. And it's sort of rapidly evolving and unfolding, and we'll hear much more over the coming weeks as to sort of what the results are of some of our testing, some of our findings, and we'll be able to better apply that to our decision-making process.
Great, thank you, Melissa. I have a question here from Steve, so I'm gonna see if I can let him talk. Give me 1 second. Okay, Steve, I think you have to unmute yourself now, but you should be able to.
Yep, I got you, Joe. Thank you.
Okay, yep.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for doing this, too. At the club level, one of the things I think our club should be doing here in Michigan is starting to prepare a little bit in terms of what we need to do to go back to our schools and go to our pools and everything else to look proactive. So we run out of 3 schools right now, 3 different school districts, and they're all a little bit different. They all have some politics to them and so forth. They're different people that manage those facilities. And one of the things our club is doing is we're trying to think ahead for those scenarios and say, we want to be able to proactively go to the schools maybe in the next 2 weeks and say, we don't know what's coming out, but here's what we're going to do in terms of when we do get to start. If you allow us to start in May, here we are. We start in June or July, this is what we're going to do. And here's the specific way that a practice is actually going to run. So that we have those things drawn out so that they're maybe allowing us in on the first day that they can versus waiting it out and waiting for them to make the decision, and then we have to scramble. So one of the things I'm pushing our coach Patrick to do is to get together with all the coaches across Michigan and come up with what that looks like. So how do we proactively go to these pools and these schools and facilities and say, look, we've thought this through, we are ready, and we're going to go to scenario B, or we're going to go to scenario C, or whatever it is to be able to get started. So I just wanted to mention that real quick. And I think that's important at the club level, I think it's important right now.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great piece of advice, Steve. And I think that goes to something Mark was talking about a little bit earlier, which is making sure you're engaging with your facilities throughout this and recognizing that they're your partners in this. So I would encourage teams to, again, remain in contact with facilities and things like that. So please, by all means, continue to do that. I mean, I think that's a fantastic piece of advice, Steve. Thank you so much for sharing. We have one more question in the Q&A here. Oh, Steve, Steve, I think you put your hand back up. Hold on. Whoops. Oh, okay, Steve, I think you put your hand back down. So if you need to talk again, feel free to raise it. We have one more question here in the Q&A. If a facility says no spectators, would that be a violation of MAP, and how are we handling that? Melissa?
You want me to go? Yes, yes, it is a violation of MAP. You need to have at least one individual per athlete in the stands or on the premises. So we may be modifying, have to modify who can attend meets from a spectator standpoint.
Okay. I think that's a great question we can take back as well to USA Swimming if that is something, because I know that for a very brief time here, Mark and Randy, we had at one point we were contemplating the no spectator thing or limited spectators, and I think it was before then everything got canceled and we chose to cancel everything. So if that is potentially one of the restrictions that we might be facing as we start to unflip the switch, how to handle that. and communicate that to facilities.
Yeah, that's, oh, sorry. I was just going to say that's something as part of the operational risk group. We've been discussing, you know, weekly, every other week. And, you know, I know there's discussions going back and forth with Safe Sport.
Right, and some of that safe sport policy is controlled by the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, and we don't have options on it. Now, you know, the changes in how competitions occur is not just going to be a swimming only thing. So I can't say 100% that Safe Sport, U.S. Center for Safe Sport might reconsider or modify policies. But I would imagine if we see a dramatic change in the landscape of how spectators are allowed in or not allowed in to facilities, that there would be some accommodation made in those policies. But again, until we know what that's going to look like, it's hard to predict what the reaction from the U.S. Center for Safe Sport would be, and therefore what our reaction from USA Swimming Safe Sport would be on that issue. Yeah, it's almost too early to predict, but those are all scenarios that people are talking about and going, well, if this happens, then this will happen. But I don't think it would be prudent of us to throw out all those scenarios out to the public of what it might look like, because it's almost like there's a chain reaction to everything. So many variables involved. But those are the kind of things that that are being considered on a weekly, if not daily basis.
Great, thank you, Mark. Mary asks here if there's been discussion on freezing qualifying times for next year for championship meets at the LSC level here. I think that's a conversation we're absolutely going to have. It truthfully hasn't been the top priority in the last couple of weeks. I think it's a conversation all of us are aware that we're going to need to have, and I will be referring that over to the Championship Meet Strategy Committee to evaluate and consider if it's a freezing or if it's backing off a little bit, or what it might need to be for championship times. But I think everybody's aware that that's going to likely be a significant thing that's going to happen to meet the needs of the athletes and such. So we've cleared successfully, panel, the Q&A box here. I am gonna leave like maybe one more minute in case anybody's got last minute questions, or if you want to raise your hand in the participant window, please do feel free to do that. And we'll take any final questions you might have. I know I've stolen part of your Saturday evening. Oh, okay, good. No, more question. Has there been any thought about splitting the 12 and under meet in the future, possibly separating 11, 12, and 10 and under to limit spectators? I think that is, there's been a lot of conversation just in general about our championship meet structure, Dan. I think the Championship Meet Strategy Committee, from my understanding, is working on a couple creative solutions to what some of these things look like. So that's the answer to your question there. I am going to turn it over here to Mark. He has a couple additional comments he wants to make, so I'm going to let him steal the show from me for a couple minutes.
I'm going to find my mouse to unmute myself. So a couple of things. Just want to let you all know that Randy and I are available, to every coach, every team, every board member, to help you out in any way possible. Randy, if you want to put your contact info in the chat, and then I'll type mine in after I get done speaking. But one of our goals is to get in contact with as many teams as possible over the next couple of weeks. So we may be working with Joe and some of your other Michigan board members to set up some smaller group conference calls with coaches to discuss that. But and we're also available if you want, if you're doing Zoom meetings with your teams and you want one of us to come on for a half hour and speak on a topic, we're more than happy to do that to help you stay engaged with your athletes during this time. So, or the same thing goes for any of the other members of our team services staff. I've got three other great people that I work with: Jamie Lewis, Scott Colby, and Jay Chambers. And any of us would be certainly more than happy to help out your teams in any way. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of that. And thanks for your time this afternoon and being on here. And obviously you have a board of directors in Michigan and a general chair and other key people that are just doing an awesome job of leading you. Extremely well organized and extremely proactive. So I applaud the Michigan Swimming Board on that, and just encourage you to reach out if you have questions for us regarding USA Swimming.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So with that, that will conclude our webinar portion, our town hall. Before everybody signs off, really quickly, quick comment. Club presidents and club head coaches, at 6:45, you should have received an automated email with our, with the session that I talked about for a Zoom meeting with everybody. If you want to do face-to-face, talk it out amongst yourselves. That is now in your inbox, I hope, because I scheduled it to go out. I will be sending out a recording of this town hall for you. I'll be sending out the slide deck. I will be sure to include Mark and Randy's contact information in that debrief for you. I want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists for joining us: Melissa, Randy, Dawn, Mark. Thank you for taking time out of your Saturday afternoon. Hopefully this was helpful to all of you. I remain available to you 100% of the time. If you need anything, feel free to reach out via email, text, phone call. I know y'all have my phone number. You know, I wish you nothing but the best of health as we proceed through this, and I look forward to being your partner in getting through this and coming out stronger together on the other side. So thank you, everybody, for your time tonight.
Yep, thank you. Please feel free to get in touch with myself as well if you've got any questions, concerns, you know, want answers with regards to this virus and what it's doing. I'm happy to help in any way that I can.
Great. Thanks all. Have a good night.